would not describe this as a de facto ceasefire. I do think that this order from the court requires Israel and should be understood by Israel as requiring Israel to show far greater restraint in its military operation going forward. That does not mean that the military operation against Hamas and other groups has to completely stop, but for Israel to avoid the actions that it is taking in that military campaign, one, from being potentially considered acts of genocide in the future, if genocidal intent is proven, and secondly, to ensure that effective humanitarian assistance can actually get into Gaza, that requires at a minimum far greater restraint. The court explained that the duty to prevent has to do with each state's capacity to influence effectively the situation, and that capacity is going to vary a great deal from one state to another. But this is another reason why the ICJ's ruling on provisional measures is so important, because that ruling serves to put all states on notice that there is at least a significant risk, a serious risk, of something that might be genocide taking place, that genocidal acts might be taking place going forward. If you go to the ICJ's case law, that seems to trigger this idea of the duty to prevent, and then you look and say, well, which states actually are in a position to meaningfully engage in the prevention of genocide? And while there might be lots of question marks about that, I think the United States and other major funders of the agency probably fit that description. So I think there are real questions here about whether those states are living up to the duty to prevent genocide.
It wasn't the role of the court during this preliminary stage as to whether Israel has committed genocide or failed to prevent a genocide, but only whether on a much lower threshold, a much lower standard, there was an imminent risk of a genocide being committed. So it is obviously a much lower threshold for that first stage. Some commentators have said that the court could have done, because it did a similar thing with the Ukraine-Russia case. Some might say that the conflict in Ukraine is different to the conflict in Gaza, but they still could have done that. Whereas other commentators have said the measures that have been indicated by the court is still sufficient to make it not a full ceasefire, but certainly to address those concerns that it hadn't gone that far. The one thing which is important to remember is that the proceedings and the Genocide Convention itself is not imposing obligations just on Israel and South Africa. It is imposing obligations on all states parties to the Genocide Convention. That includes the United Kingdom, that includes the United States, that includes all member states. So if you are supporting a state that has now been declared as potentially either failing to prevent or actually carrying out a genocide, and you are providing material support, then of course that raises the responsibility of other states as well.